Welcome to Daredevil in the Details, a show that explores and dotes on the philosophy and the themes of Netflix's Daredevil, a digression collection brought to you by a method to the madness and ZeroIndent. Pat, how you doing? How you feeling? We're episode 2. We're getting really into some of the plot stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
What's your vibe? Where's your head at?
It's good. It's good. The more I'm rewatching this first season, the more I'm coming to love it so much. So distinct. It's so it has a lot to prove, and you can feel that in every single creative decision in it, I feel.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. That's awesome when you feel like a work of art is really trying to capture you,
It also it feels like it has a lot to prove, but it feels like it's very graceful about how it goes about it. Yeah, it's really fucking good. I'm having such
actually
a good time.
there's a lot of stuff that I'm wondering, is this pulling from myths or religious myths or something that are going over my head. A lot of it, especially the last episode, episode 6, it feels like it's one of those films that are an allegory, like a near one-to-one to some sort of Greek myth or something like that,
Yeah, okay, I could see
even if it's not, that's the sort of vibe I get from this.
Yeah, that's definitely the tone of this first season. It feels like an epic in some ways. Yeah. Look, I mean, this week we're talking about, as you said, episodes 4 through 6. So that's episode 4, 5, and 6. I think that the first 3 are really establishing the stakes in the world, and then these 3 are really I mean, this is ostensibly the Russian arc, right? This is sort of where you get the Russians. And they sort of start to break these up into Matt dealing with big chunks of the criminal element in this season. So it's it starts with establishing the stakes, then it's the Russians, and then it's and then it's kind of dealing with Foggy, and then it becomes about Nobu, and then it's Fisk, right? There's sort of this natural escalation point, or this natural kind of escalating sort of threat, I guess. I also really like these episodes. I guess we'll start our discussion with episode 4, which is In the Blood. That was written by Bill Everett and Drew Goddard, who will go on to write every episode this season, and it was directed by Ken Girotti. So Pat, could you
love your work, Ken?
Ken, chef's kiss. Could you read the summary for us, Pat?
Yeah, I'll do it right now. Okay.
Seamless.
Okay. Episode 4, In the Blood. Without any solid leads, Matt pursues Fisk by beating criminal after criminal, but no one rats on Fisk. Wesley puts pressure on the Russians to stop the Man in Black, and the Ranskahovs escalate their search for Murdoch. Meanwhile, Karen meets with Ben Urich, hoping for his help breaking the Union Allied scandal. Urich tells her to cry off before she gets hurt. The Russians kidnap Claire, who refuses to give up Matt. The Man in Black arrives and rescues Claire from a bloody beatdown. Fisk visits Vanessa's art gallery and asks her to dinner. While at dinner, the Russians barge in to accept Fisk's offer to take over their organization. After dropping Vanessa home, Fisk confronts Anatoly and slams a car door down on his head until he's decapitated.
So
just your average,
just your normal.
You know how it is.
Just your normal way to end an episode of TV. Just a classic sort of relaxing way to exit the scene. Nothing unusual, nothing weird here.
Keep walking.
Let's keep walking. This episode's really cool because I think it really sets up the position of the Russians and their motivations really clearly. and then you get Fisk just absolutely setting out to obliterate them. It's a really cool way of kind of sequencing that stuff, I guess. Like, you could imagine a version of reality where you don't get this setup, and then I think the next few episodes like aren't as kind of punchy, or like they don't have the same kind of, like, I mean, but by the end of it, like, Vlad becomes like not sympathetic, but like you can kind of empathize with, you know, his desires and his movements, and like you get the real sense that Fisk is just this like unstoppable force.
Right.
And I think that comes from the amount of legwork this does to be like, here's why the Russians are involved at all, and like here are their motivations, and like what do they want, and like what are they afraid of, and things like that.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about like, why do they go to the extent of humanizing the Russians, or why do they go to the extent that they do? And the conclusion I came to was that it's just to show how evil Fisk is by comparison, that they can make these Russian mobsters sympathetic, you know, to some extent. And, you know, by the end they team up with the hero, with Daredevil. Like, yeah, so it all, I think, circles back to Fisk.
Yeah, I guess the I think it is. I think it's giving us points of comparison for Fisk. He gets placed in contrast with, I guess, Madame Gao for the most part, in sort of comparison point where he even has a comment, I think, in the 6th episode where he's like, you know, it's impossible to lie to that woman. And he seems like genuinely afraid of whatever her capacity might be.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Russians, yeah, I think they serve as a, like, you get that scene at the start where they are making shivs from like a rib cage in a Russian prison, which is it's like the most metal thing I've ever seen in my entire goddamn life. And it's like, those dudes are still not as bad as Fisk, right? Like, those guys are not as bad as him. Yeah, I think I agree.
Yeah.
The other part here, which so I've been thinking a lot about like the Russians' place and what they're trying to do with. So you kind of have like these two concurrent stories. You have the kind of the mob dynamics happening with the Russians and with Fisk, and then you also kind of have like Karen and Ben and their kind of subplot. There's sort of something happening, I think, like with the dichotomy of those two elements, because you sort of have like in the Ben Karen dynamic, Karen is kind of the Matt Murdock of that kind of scenario, where she's the one that kind of thinks she can take the risk, right? Like, she thinks that she can wear the risk of getting involved and trying to push this thing and try to like get results and answers and things like that. And then Ben is really kind of like the foggy foil, where he's sort of like, hey, this is like, maybe this is a bad idea. Like, these could have some serious consequences. And you can already see the parallels there, I think, between those two arcs and those two characters, in a way that I think is like really interesting. It just made me think about how much they echo a lot and kind of how much they rhyme. Seeing those dynamics.
It's also like, I think, where a lot of the noir elements come in. It's quite literally like a detective story now that Karen's like an investigator.
That's true. And I guess she's literally doing the thing you do in a detective story, right? Where she's like, you know, pursuing the lead and then like gets the lead, but at what cost? Like, you know, it's sort of really very literally, which is cool. I think those are really interesting levers to pull on. I'm really going to get them pulled on more and more in the next season, when that really becomes like the thrust of her kind of place in the story, I guess.
Yeah. I love how consistent Karen's direction in the series is, starting from right here. She is an investigator. Like, that's her whole thing, is like, you know, needing to find out the truth. And it just keeps building, and her character builds with it, and it's just not you can easily imagine a show where Karen is not very interesting, but she is. It's because of like the place she gets put in the show of being this sort of like instrumental investigator, compared to Matt's just like brute force investigative nature.
Yeah, she's kind of like, I guess together they sort of like they're the two parts of like the whole Batman thing, but separately. Where like Matt's entire
Yeah,
method
yeah.
is like beating the shit out of people. She's doing like the world's greatest detective route kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I like that.
Yeah, I also like something that they do in this episode in particular, which I noticed is they start to have these little asides with Matt and Foggy where we kind of they seem to be deliberately setting up some dynamics of their relationship. I think in order for them to get to do the thing they do later on with Foggy and Matt. But you get this little butcher story where Foggy's like, "Oh, did I ever tell you that I was supposed to be a butcher?" And Matt's like, "Oh my god, this shit again."
Not the butcher story.
It's so good. And then you get this really cool contrast cut where Matt's insisting that they're doing the right thing, and then it immediately contrast cuts to the Russians kidnapping Claire, and it's like literally one. It's like the frames go bang bang, and then it's you get her being kidnapped, and it's like it's Matt going, "We're doing the right thing," and then you immediately see the cost of doing the right thing, and I think it's that deliberate. It's just something the show does really well, where it's really exacting with some of that stuff, in a way that like I think when you get to things like Iron Fist, there isn't that deliberateness, and so even though a lot of the same elements are there, it just never quite works. Probably contrasted again with Luke Cage, which is trying to do a very different thing, but it's still a very sort of focused. But yeah, I just noted that as like I saw it and I went, oh, that's stuck out in my brain as like a really shocking moment, because you have that kind of quick flip on face of this calm conversation where you're like, yeah, that's just two boys chilling out, and then suddenly Claire getting got.
Some really like elementary, tenets of like storytelling, but just done really well. Yeah.
I think it's actually like honestly the best summary of the show is it's like all of the fundamentals are done exquisite. Like it's all of the fundamentals cranked up to 11 and executed perfectly, and it's not trying to be anything it isn't, or it's not. It doesn't think it's smarter than like what makes good TV shows work, I guess.
Right. Yeah. That's and I feel the same way about Better Call Saul. Like I think that we've talked about this before, how the filmmaking in that show is like really, it's as if a show manifested from like your film teacher's lecture. Like it's if he gave a lecture into like an AI program, that's what it would spit out. Like
100%. Okay, so what do you think of, because I think this is a really contentious thing that a lot of people have different opinions on. What do you think about Fisk and Vanessa's weird chemistry? Like just the bizarre energy they have.
It's hard to put my finger on it, because you know why you love Wilson, because he's awkward and respectful, while being like this absolute like evil scumbag. That's an interesting contradiction there. So it's compelling. Whereas Vanessa is she's sort of like classy and sophisticated, and she doesn't seem to be afraid of Wilson, and that sort of gets developed more in like the third season, where it turns out like she's actually like she likes a bit of evil on the side as well. It turns out, but she's also like she's got really strong like femme fatale energy, more to that noir motif.
100%. Yeah, she's big femme fatale energy.
Will I see you again?
I don't usually date customers.
You came out with me tonight.
And here we are. So
I can return the painting, and I'd no longer be
I'm not interested in gestures, Wilson. Or your money. Or whatever that was all about at the restaurant. I went out with you because there's something different about you. Not so sure it's a good thing now.
I don't know. What do you think of Vanessa?
Man, I keep going back and forth on it, because I've been paying attention to it this time, because I guess I didn't really consider it the first few, the other times I've watched it. I think that second dinner scene where she's brought a gun to the dinner, I found that really interesting because that interaction is like so. It's like they're trying to do this thing where because Fisk is kind of awkward and respectful, he can't really flirt. So the only way he knows how to flirt is to like say a lot of words about a thing and imply a bunch of like innuendo or whatever.
Yeah.
Where, I think the way that scene plays out, I got a pretty clear picture of like she kind of likes the fact that he's dangerous. Like she's kind of like into that. In a way that's kind of interesting. But yeah, the other thing, I'm really not sure what to make of it. I think I'll have more opinions in the next episode, where we get the second dinner.
Was that not in this episode?
No.
Oh no,
good.
Yeah.
Because that's when the bombs go off.
Yeah. It reminds me of it's a similar kind of motivation to in Goodfellas. The main protagonist, how the woman that he marries, her motivation like throughout the film is like it gets revealed that she the dude's obviously a psycho, but she's into that. She's like, oh man, I like dangerous men.
Yeah.
And so it's a thing.
Apparently it's a thing, and it's a weird thing to watch in real time. I mean during that so this is the gun thing is the next dinner. I beg your pardon. Oh, maybe it is this one. But there are 3 dinners. There's the one we saw last time, there's the one we get this time, and then there's the next one, which is the one where the bombs go off. But anyway, we get Fisk telling the anecdote about growing up in Hell's Kitchen, leaving, and then coming to realize that like the city is in his blood, which is also the title of this episode. Not sure what to make of that. In
the blood.
Yeah.
This just extends to Fisk's motivation as a whole. Like, I don't know what to make of that, about feeling like the city is a part of him and therefore like he has to dedicate his whole life into making it better, and like what he actually wants to make it into is never explained. It seems like he just wants to be a dictator, from what I can gather.
Well, I think he wants to do what his dad did, right? Like he wants to like be in charge and change. Like I don't think he has anything in particular in mind other than the power that he saw his dad trying to achieve. And he's like, that's his like entire motivation is like, I want to supplant my because that's why I sort of thought In the Blood was like heritage and sort of like the city's like his inheritance maybe or something in that kind of realm.
Yeah, no, I that's a good it's a good analysis. Yeah.
That sounded much more prepared than I was. I just thought about that. But
I forgot the whole thing with his dad.
That's coming up pretty soon. That shit gets gnarly. It's a really really cool little monologue he gets, and you get this impression, and he sort of says it vocally. He vocalizes this. But you really get the impression that Fisk never talks about himself, like ever, to anyone. Mm-hmm. He's always talking business, or he's always talking to Wesley. Like he's just never like this. There's a kind of the performance. Like he's sort of I'm not sure what the right word is for it, but you can feel him trying to get this out and not really knowing the right cadence and not really knowing like how one talks about their past and motivation and things like that. It's really a stunning sort of piece of acting, I think, that's really understated is maybe the word. Yeah.
The way he sort of plays Fisk as well throughout of this, like, his the way he talks, like this, what do you call it? Staccato?
Yeah,
staccato. Yeah. And how he's always fidgeting and like he's this man who just can't sit still. I think, I don't know if it's in this season, but he talks about like, I tried meditating and I couldn't. There's just too much going on in my mind, too many distractions. It's this really like volatile man, it's just like the person who will just snap, and who we do see snap at the end of this episode. Yeah, it's an amazingly consistent like performance with the writing. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it almost feels like he always feels, I'm not sure if there's the right word for it, but he feels very charged, like as if at any second, like he's constantly just containing this like complete force of like physical domination, and that's where like that's kind of manifests in like the twitching, and then like sometimes when he yells you suddenly feel like the performance drop and you're suddenly like, oh shit, like what's gonna happen now. And yeah, we get that. We'll talk about it in a second at the end of this episode, but like I don't think until this episode it fully sinks in that this is a scary dude. Like he's not just a smart business guy, he is like physically terrifying. Like when you get that end, so I guess we can talk about it now because it's kind of related. He basically, like, if you haven't seen it, he beats the shit out of Anatoly, who's a pretty big dude, chucks him the fuck around like he weighs nothing, and then like drives this dude to his knees, slams his head into like the floor of the door of the car door, and then just slams the fucking car door until his head comes off. And it's like legit the first time that I went, or like that I think the show really manages to communicate like Matt is absolutely no physical contest for this dude. Like this guy could kill Matt Murdock in a fucking heartbeat. And that's a really cool way to communicate that, I think.
It's also such a cool contrast between there's a shot where there's a few shots where it's from inside the car and he's holding the car door with both hands and he's going and it's so animalistic and just like uncontrolled compared to Matt, who's like a precise like boxer, pop. Yeah. Again, like a literal like David and Goliath, but there's even more sort of mirroring going on, like in the fighting styles, for example.
Well, he doesn't even Fisk doesn't even defend himself either. He just lets Anatoly hit him because he doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Like it's incredible to watch.
Yeah.
Damn. Well, they don't fuck with Fisk, I think, is the lesson there. On that note, though, I really like the conversation that they have in that Wesley and Anatoly have in the car. Wesley has this really great line. Wesley's full of shit like this. He's such a great
He's a philosopher.
He really is. He says, they
say the past is etched in stone, but it isn't. It's smoke, trapped in a closed room, swirling, changing, buffeted by the passing of years and wishful thinking. But even though our perception of it changes, one thing remains constant. The past can never be completely erased. It lingers. Like the scent of burning wood.
And then Anatoly's like, man, that's really deep, dude. And then Fisk opens the door and fucking pulls him out and then kills him. And it's almost like Wesley sort of philosophically justifying what Fisk is about to do in some ways. Or kind of explaining the philosophy of him and Fisk and like why this is a thing that they do, I guess. It's like
cool. It's like that analogy of like, the past is like smoke, it's malleable, but it's still there and we sort of interpret it how we will, which is kind of fits like, I guess it's like a general thing in storytelling of heroes and villains where they both have fucked up pasts and like, whatever, shitty childhoods, trauma, all that. Mm-hmm. Some people get past that and turn out good. Some people don't and turn out bad.
Yeah.
Both use that to justify the things that they do. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I think especially if you think about that in the context of like Anatoly and like the reason they didn't accept Fisk's offer is like out of pride. Because as we saw at the start of the episode, right, like they managed to flee Russia and they were like, we're gonna fucking take over Hell's Kitchen, like we're gonna own this city, and that past trauma is what leads them to this ambition, which is ultimately where the pride comes from, which is what gets him killed in the end.
Yeah.
So sort of this like cyclical nature of like Wesley, yeah, kind of suggesting you can't really outrun what you've done, and what's been done to you. It necessarily shapes you, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also you shape yourself out of what you think you should be shaped as from your past.
Oh yeah.
I feel like there's some agency in what he's talking about.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. He's sort of going, you can try and change, even though our perception changes, which is what we're in control of, you can't get rid of it. It's always there. You're just changing what you think it is, or you're pretending to think of it differently or something like that. I also liked I've just written out of things I liked list here. What did you think of the fight in the car park where Matt goes to rescue Claire?
Yeah, that was all right. I really like Claire. I like how much she fights back when she's being dragged out of the car. Because I feel like you never see that.
No.
When people are getting kidnapped or whatever in film and TV, they just go along with it. But no, Claire, she's actually, she's trying, man. She's trying to fucking kick him. Yeah.
Biting and scratching.
Which is exactly what Claire would do.
100%. Then she fucking aces that guy in the face with the baseball bat at the end.
Oh yeah.
That goes hard as hell. I was like, God damn, that's really done him in. This did remind me a little bit of they're sort of replicating, and it's an obvious inspiration, but they're kind of replicating the fight scene from Batman Begins in the Narrows when he first wears the suit. There's a few shots that are almost identical to shots in that film.
It also in the first episode of Daredevil, where there's a bunch of shipping containers and shit, and he's hopping around on them. That's also pretty much Batman
Very
Begins.
similar.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool that they get to just wear their inspiration on their sleeve and be like, yeah, we're doing a Batman show. Don't worry about it. Don't even trip, dog.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Don't worry. You're going to forget all about Batman in a few episodes. Don't you worry.
Don't you worry about that. It's going to be all Daredevil all the time. Do you have anything... those are kind of the big things I pulled out of the first episode. Is there anything you want to touch on particularly? Anything that you think is worthy of expanding on or zooming in on?
Yeah, just something else that I like is how when Wesley goes to the Russians to get to propose the takeover, and he sort of explains all the different parts of their organization and what all the different people do. How Madame Gao sells heroin and then the Russians distribute it, and he's like, yeah, what you failing is affecting everyone. And again, I'm going to harp on about this for the next two episodes, but again, it's more of the process that I'm talking about, how the show, commits to showing and telling you how things work, which is very satisfying and interesting.
You get that a lot with the kind of... that's a really good observation that I think... I mean, they do that a lot in these next few episodes with the police's involvement in this as well.
Absolutely.
And you kind of get a real feel for this is how all the levers get pulled such that you could be in charge of most of the cops. Because how typically with corrupt police in any kind of media, it always feels a little far-fetched.
It's everyone is corrupt, not just a few people in this case.
Exactly.
Literally,
Yeah, it's kind of sick, to be honest, the way that they get to pull that maneuver. Yeah. I think that's something we'll kind of keep paying attention to is how does the world turn and what does that mean for the people in it? Particularly when you get long-running characters like Turk and Claire, who aren't necessarily key pieces to the plot, but are they feel like people who have a life in this space because you get those understandings of what is happening around them and how does how does the city function and what's their place in it. I think it gives it a lot more gravity and kind of grounds them really, really well.
That's why I wished, I really, really wanted the other Defenders shows to be good. Some of them are, but I wanted all of them to be as good as Daredevil.
Yeah. Jessica Jones season 1 comes close-ish.
I think it's as good as anything from Daredevil, honestly.
It's so good.
Jessica Jones season 1.
That
Yeah.
and the first season of... I really like Luke Cage. I think it's a fucking awesome show. It's just very different.
I think the first half of the first season of Luke Cage, I also think, is as good as anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame. Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that when we get to the Defenders, because there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, should we move on to episode 5 then?
Promise you won't get mad.
You bought a fax machine? From the early 90s.
Oh, it's not that old, I think. But the rest of the stuff's coming tomorrow.
The rest?
Yeah, like a printer and conference phones and a copier, and yeah, there was an auction and we needed stuff, so I charged it to the office, but don't freak out. Okay, I got a thing, some money coming in from... No, it doesn't matter. You mad?
I ever tell you my mom wanted me to be a butcher?
Alrighty. Okay, episode 5, titled World on Fire. So, Fisk explains his actions with the Russians to Madame Gao, Leland, and Nobu. Despite their protests, he convinced them to stay the course while he removes Vladimir from the equation. Meanwhile, Elena Cardenas seeks help from Nelson and Murdoch as Armand Tully, the owner of her rent-controlled building, is illegally forcing the tenants of her building to leave. Foggy and Karen head to Landman and Zack to confront Foggy's ex, Marcy, about the building. Foggy manages to rattle her. While searching for complaints about Tully, Matt overhears Detective Hoffman and Blake killing a Russian. Matt interrogates Blake, steals his phone, and hunts down Vladimir. Concurrently, Foggy and Karen head to Elena Cardenas' apartment and assist with repair, leading to a very strange, intimate dinner. At dinner with Vanessa, Fisk watches his plan fall into place as Turk baits the Russians into thinking the man in black was responsible for Anatoly's death. In the chaos, Gao's workers blow the Russians' operation into nothing. Vlad survives barely, but Matt finds him and they are surrounded by police.
This one was directed by Farron Blackburn.
Love your work, Farron.
Good stuff. This is a really... something this show does really well that I've just now occurred to me, as I said, who directed it, is all of the nighttime stuff is really well shot. I think sometimes nighttime stuff can be really tricky in TV shows. But I think because it's in a city and they get to use a lot of like the kind of industrial lighting, you're never not sure what's going on, which can sometimes be a real issue with TV shows that use a lot of nighttime stuff.
That is true. This is a very dark show.
Yeah, literally.
I would recommend watching it at night because you probably won't be able to see anything because of the glare.
Yes.
That's something I have run into.
Yeah, I've got
Yeah.
my TV is like, its whole specialty is doing blacks. So I'll just put on the do the blacks really good mode at night and then it looks perfect.
Yeah.
We got to talk about the infamous World on Fire little moment here. I think we should talk about it up top because I don't think it has much bearing, but I know a lot of people really don't like... to set this up for people that haven't seen the episode. So Matt has rescued Claire from the Russians in the previous episode and they're back at his apartment. And she sort of asks him, like, she said something like, you're blind, but you see so much. And she sort of asks him, like, how does he see? And he kind of talks about, like, there are, you have to think of it as, like, more than 5 senses. Like, it's, like, changes in air pressure and, like, heat and, like, micro, like, sort of gives this, like, explanation of sort of how he's able to attenuate to the world. And then she's like, yeah, but what does that look like? And then he says, think of it like a world on fire. And then we get a very, very brief, it's like maybe 10 frames of what Matt sees, or like the rendering of what he sees. And it's sort of this like impressionistic kind of like flamey image thing with like, but he's kind of like almost like X-ray where you can see like veins and stuff. It's very weird.
Well, it looks like hell, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is what they're going for. A lot of people don't like this. What's your take? Obviously, we've both seen this a lot. What are your feelings on this kind of visualization, I guess?
I mean, I could see how how you wouldn't like it if you took it literally.
Yeah.
Like, and my take is you're obviously not meant to take it literally. Like, it's clearly like I mean, it even says it like it's a metaphor. Like, you know, it's
Fragments form a sort of impressionistic painting.
Okay, but what does that look like? Like, what do you actually see?
A world on fire.
If all I saw was fire, I'd probably want to hit people too.
I mean, you know, it's a cool bit of like theme, but no, it works for me. I don't mind. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm kind of the same. I think when I first saw it, I was bothered by it a lot more than I have on subsequent viewings. I just think it does that thing of like it maybe errs too close to like explaining a thing which didn't need to be explained. I don't know. One of my criticisms of Daredevil, the few that I have, is that they have a lot of episodes of TV to do per season, and sometimes they end up filling the time with being like, what haven't we talked about before? And this is one of those things where they haven't really talked about it before, and it feels like they're going, oh, we should provide an explanation so that people stop thinking or asking about this. But like when you're watching it, you're not thinking and asking about it. Like it's sort of, you go like, yeah, he can sense it. You don't need the visualization. I feel if you cut those frames, the scene still works and it gets the metaphor across. I think just the literalization of it on screen is perhaps where I have some issues, but I don't mind it. I just know it's something that I think if I were revisiting this, I would cut that visualization just for the sake of it being less disruptive.
You know what I would do if I was crafting that scene? I would make, you know, how it has the close-up on Matt's face, you know, it's a world on fire. I would then cut to an extreme close-up of Matt's eye, and I would hit the reflection in Matt's eye of that scene of Claire with the fire and stuff.
That's a way of doing it, yeah. Yeah. Because then it's way smaller, so it's less detail, so it kind of...
Yeah.
There you go, we fixed
it. And it sort of gets the point across more that it's metaphorical.
Yes, it's not supposed to be literal.
Yeah.
But also, like, it's pretty obvious, right? He's going to become... The show is called Daredevil. He's kind of like a messiah figure, kind of, or he's like a martyr. And then he sees the world on fire, and his name is Daredevil. It's like, I don't know how you miss this being a metaphor, frankly. It's pretty on the nose. In a way that I don't mind. I just think it's pretty obvious. Yeah. Really cool episode. There's a lot of moving parts here. There's a moment at the start that always makes my skin crawl where Wesley goes to Vladimir's like office and he pretends not to know where Anatoly is.
Yeah.
And like you watch Wesley just like manipulate this guy effortlessly, and it's like
he's so good at it.
He's so like cold. Like he's got this like reptilian stillness to him that's just phenomenal. he's so hard to look away from.
Yeah. He's very convincing.
Do you find so okay, there's a few things I pulled out of this episode that I think are worth kind of digging into. One of them that I think you may have picked up on as well, but definitely from like a direction and storytelling perspective, is so they choose. So I'm watching this with the forced English subtitles when they exist. So that's when they'll subtitle the Russians or whatever. I find this really interesting choice that they're doing this season where they're not subtitling Madame Gao at all. Yeah. Instead, and Wesley doesn't translate her, he interprets her. So he doesn't say what she said. He says what she means. And it's a really interesting choice because you kind of get you get Wesley mediating the conversations with Fisk and the others on their behalf. And he's just sort of this like trusted interlocutor where like, you know, there's a moment where she says something and he's like, oh yeah, she's also displeased. But the way she says it, you're like, nah, she hella pissed actually. But it's like this constant de-escalation. Like he's just this sort of perfect middleman in all situations.
Yeah. I love how also just, apart from like Wesley just like being like a connoisseur of like wine and just being like a crafty everyman, he also apparently speaks Mandarin and Japanese
and Russian,
and probably Russian.
Yeah,
like,
it's crazy.
Yeah, he's such a cool character, man. I fucking love Wesley.
He's got so much depth to him that you're like, where does this guy come from?
Yeah. But also Madame Gao is that classic like mysterious Chinese philosopher character. She's speaking in riddles, right? Which is kind of makes sense why Wesley interprets it the way he does, because if she's speaking riddles, he sort of has to interpret the riddles essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess that makes sense.
Also,
yeah, I haven't really thought of it like that.
Yeah. Also, just every time I watch through this series, I mean, I love the actor for Nobu, but his Japanese is trash.
Oh, is it?
It's pretty bad. It gets better in the second season. He must have like brushed up on it or something.
Yeah.
But in this first season, it's pretty horrible.
Did not know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Damn. Well,
Which makes me wonder, like, is the Russians like that as well? Like, maybe. I don't know if those actors are actually Russian or not.
I don't know. But Nobu thankfully doesn't say much, so.
Yeah, that is true.
He just gets to be this intimidating dude, and then you're like, what is this guy's deal? And then he turns out to be a fucking ninja, and you're like, oh shit. Yeah, he's it's a really cool dynamic. I think I picked it early on the first time I watched it, but it's really cool to see it play out again, which is there's 2 points of failure in this business. It's Wesley and it's Leland, where Leland has all the money, and then Wesley is like the mediator. And it's really cool to see everyone tiptoe the fuck around Wesley and respect him, and no one give a shit what Leland thinks. It's a really cool. It's a really interesting dynamic where it's clear that he's under the heel, even though Wesley is the assistant. Wesley has far more power than any of them next to Fisk. It's very cool, dynamic wise.
Well, that's what makes him such a good assistant, right? Is because he's not just a messenger. He's like actually kind of the source of power.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he holds a lot of authority.
Well, yeah, because up until the previous episode, he completely mediates Fisk's existence in the show, right? Like, he is the kind of vessel through which Fisk gets to be in the text for quite a bit of it. Yeah, it's goddamn, Wesley's the best. Okay, I've written this down. What does Pat think about Fisk emptying an entire restaurant just to have dinner with Vanessa?
I don't know. I didn't think much about it because he says it's not, Vanessa says, I'm not interested in gestures. And then Wilson goes, it's not a gesture. I just didn't want to be interrupted again, which is practical. And also, as much as he says it's not, it is kind of a gesture. Like, it is kind of a play, a move. Yeah. Why? What do you think?
No, I noted it because I hadn't really picked up on that before. But like when it happened, I was like, huh? Like I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, it gives him like this sense of gravity, I think, or like it feels so effortlessly in character for him, but also a bizarre thing to do to another human being. Like he doesn't tell her beforehand either. She turns up and she's like, "The fuck is going on here?" And then just takes it in stride.
Right. Maybe compared to their last date, which was out in public, it was like a pretty traditional date. This date is more him being like, no, this is who I am. This is my true self. I prefer to have dinner alone. I don't like being out in public.
Okay. Well, yeah, because he kind of says like, I'm private. Like I don't really do this very often. All that stuff.
Yeah. So this, and especially because this date is the date where he's like, all cards on the table. I will just tell you anything if you ask me. Yeah.
She seems to know pretty quickly that he's a criminal. Like she picks it up almost immediately. And this is where we get the gun conversation that is just the weirdest shit I've seen in a long time, where it's like, she seems to get really, like, she seems to be very attracted to the fact that she was afraid enough to bring a gun. Like, there's something going on there, with the imagery and like with temptation and things like that. And with like loneliness, where you get like the rabbit in the snowstorm that kind of keeps coming back to the conversation. She even says like at one point she says my painting. She says my painting. And then he goes, no, my painting or something. Like there's a
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's such a good little moment, and you can tell that like she's like really into that shit. Like she likes how kind of subtly dominating he is as a personality.
Yeah. I love that line where, Fisk asks her, what type of gun is that, and why'd you bring it? Oh no, he says, and did you think you would need that tonight? She goes, I'm not an idiot. I know what you do. That's why I brought a gun to a dinner date. Like it's just sort of like a kind of straightforward, but kind of like sassy response. It's like you're a fucking you're one of the most dangerous people I've ever met. That's why I brought a fucking gun to this date. What are you talking about?
Yeah. It's so good. It's a really good little sequence. I think it's a really strangely inspired choice to have this happening alongside everything else. Like it's sort of this like obviously it's serving to make a weakness for Fisk, right? That's sort of fundamentally at a plot level what this is doing is like Vanessa will be his undoing this season to an extent, but it's also like you kind of alluded to before, it manages to do this without it doesn't really humanize him in an empathetic kind of way, but you get a greater insight into who he is. Like it's not like the Russians, where the Russians you're like, okay, they're bad dudes, but like they're still people. You never quite get there with Fisk. You always feel like he's sort of I just never feel that way with him.
I like this line where he's like he's talking about his life as a mobster, and he goes, I take no pleasure in it. I don't enjoy cruelty, which is false. Like it's just straight up not true, which reveals a bit of like cognitive dissonance with Fisk, which actually kind of plays into the overarching arc of Fisk in season 1, which culminates at the end when he has that realization like he's not the good Samaritan, he's the malevolent force. But, I don't know, that's so consistent. Like it's such a cool revelation.
I think it's the idea that he is in denial about why he's doing this and like what that represents. But Vanessa seems to know immediately. Like she kind of clues into that, and that's sort of why they have that conversation, I guess.
And that's probably why Fisk likes her so much, is because she just sees him for like who he is.
It's really interesting. I also enjoy the idea that like he only wears black. We'll get the kind of twist at the end where like he changes his outfit and stuff, which is a really interesting kind of maneuver. But there's this way in which they kind of draw a lot of contrasts between Fisk and Murdoch, where like, and I don't know which writer said this, I don't know who to credit, but they're both men in black, but one of them is lying to themselves about their true nature, and there's this dichotomy of the two, in that regard.
And in that line where he says, I don't enjoy cruelty, which isn't true, and then it sort of mirrors what Matt says to I forgot her name.
Claire.
Who's Rosario Dawson's
Claire.
character?
He says it to Claire when they're on the rooftop, and
well, no, he says the opposite. He says, I like hurting people.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Which
she doesn't believe, which is a lie. There's a cool rhyming happening there. It's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And I like how there's this whole episode, there's like these sort of parallels where everyone's like sort of on a date or like having some romance, there's Claire and Matt's relationship sort of develops in this episode. Foggy and Karen are on a date in this episode, and then Wilson and Vanessa.
Everyone except Turk. Everyone except Lonely Turk. Turk gets no love.
He's on a date with his guns, man.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. He's on a date with his firearms. I've written down here, Turk really needs to stop talking to people. He keeps getting in trouble. We also get our second reminder in this little dinner sequence. Fisk touches his cufflinks when he talks about the city, where we get the city as an analog for his father again. This is our second reminder before our reveal, which is coming up. You mentioned it, so I want to talk about it. What the fuck is happening with the energy between Foggy and Karen? This is like, I don't know what is going on when I'm watching this, but it is. There's this moment where like, Karen's almost flirting about Matt to Foggy. It's so weird.
Yeah, I knew what you were gonna say. Yeah, and she's like, yeah. So why does Karen want Foggy to touch her face? I think it's because she's into Matt and wants to imagine like it's Matt, right?
It's
like,
so weird.
It's kind of fucked up. I'm not gonna lie. Like,
and
she kind of not so subtly asks about like Matt's dating life, and yeah,
and there's an immediate moment where like Karen asks him a question. I can't remember what it is, but he's sort of saying like he somehow always knows that they're hot, and when they're into him. And then she's like, oh, well, what does he think about me? And then Foggy immediately has to catch himself and like try and veer the conversation in a different direction, because he already knows that she likes him and he likes her. Like you can see it on his face in like a split second, and he sort of diverts the conversation. The vibes are off, man. I don't like it. I don't like it one bit.
It's weird how this the beginning of this first season kind of flirts with this love triangle between Karen and Foggy and Matt, before it decides like, no, Foggy's gonna hook up with Marcy, and then Karen and Matt are gonna be the romantic couple. It seems kind of arbitrary to me when you look back, but I don't know.
Yeah, it just struck me as weird. Like I didn't remember the scene. I didn't remember how weird it was, like at all. But I think there's also like there's something happening there where like Karen really genuinely has a lot of admiration for Foggy. Like he's just like straight up a good dude, and a really good lawyer. And this is the first episode where he doesn't just sort of feel. There's a way that Foggy comes across in the show where he can kind of sometimes feel like a bit, compared to Matt, he can feel a bit like, I'm not sure what the word is. He's kind of neutralized in comparison, or he feels kind of neutered by comparison. And then you get that scene with Marcy, and you suddenly go like, oh, that's the thing that people see in him that it completes his personality. Like he has this ability to like put his foot down, but do it really elegantly, and sort of like, it doesn't come across as like, I think a lot of time when Matt does stuff like that, it can be really self-aggrandizing, or like he can come across as very, quite literally righteous, I guess. Whereas Foggy really comes across as just like someone that gives a shit and is doing his best to fight back, and doing his best to like stand up for what he believes in. And you know, every time there's an opportunity to help someone, he takes it, even though he's always talking about like, oh, you know, we should have taken the money, we should be rich. Literally every time there's an opportunity to do the right thing and help someone, he does it. It's a good dude.
Yep. That's what do you, as Robert McKee says, it's character versus characterization, baby.
We done did it. Y'all gotta check him out. He's a good dude. Foggy for mayor, frankly. I'd vote for him. Anything else in this episode that you wanna touch on?
I just like Matt and Claire's romance a lot. For some reason, I feel like the reason why he's into Claire is the same reason why he's into Electra. It's because he can sort of be his true self around her. And they have a lot of chemistry. I won't lie. Like I dig it. I like watching them on screen.
They have so much chemistry.
Yeah. And I like the way it progresses as well. You know, to eventually, you know, throughout the episode, Claire, they're having that argument, and then Matt says, "What am I supposed to do, Claire? Just let them win?" And then Claire says, "Well, what you do is important to so many people. I get that, but I can't let myself fall in love with someone who's so close to becoming what he hates," which is like very sort of, you know, accurate and, you know, perceptive about Matt, and B, sort of like it's a pretty conclusive pin in that romance, and it wraps it all up, I think, quite nicely,
very neatly.
You know? Yeah. And but it's, you know, it's they still, you know, it was still a cool romance. I don't know. I just really dig it. I really dig their romance.
You made a really good observation there, which hadn't really clicked for me, which is I think the reason I like it is it's a very neat resolution. I think sometimes you get into these kind of pretzels with this sort of thing where if it's not a story about romance, sometimes you have to find really arbitrary reasons why those characters shouldn't get together, or like you have to invent some kind of contrivance. It's quite refreshing that they just like, it's an argument, yes, but it's also two grown-ups just saying the things they both know to be true.
Yeah.
Which I think is really hard to do. I mean, I've been humming and hawing about it in the fourth book, like when I was putting that together, because it's this thing I have to do with the romance in it. And it took forever, but when you finesse that stuff and it feels right, you can tell when it's not contrived and feels like really naturalized. And it's just like, it's damn impressive, frankly. Like,
it is.
Yeah. Plus, it frees her up for the stuff in Luke Cage and all that sort of thing. So,
yeah. And you better believe it's going to be a fucking point of conflict in my fanfic. Sorry to keep bringing it up, but yeah, I just...
Hey, you know what? Wouldn't be a fanfic without some romance, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Love it.
I've done things that I'm not proud of, Vanessa. I've hurt people, and I'm going to hurt more. It's impossible to avoid for what I'm trying to do. But I take no pleasure in it. In cruelty. But this city isn't a caterpillar. It doesn't spin a cocoon and wake up a butterfly. A city crumbles and fades. It needs to die before it can be reborn.
So I don't need the gun?
You're by my side. It's the safest place that you could ever be.
Let's talk about episode 6 and then kind of look ahead a little bit. So episode 6 is Condemned. It's written by Bill Everett, Andrew Goddard, and is directed by Guy Ferland. Very interesting, really, really interesting episode. I think this is like, I forgot this episode happened, frankly. Like, I just completely have erased it from my brain for some reason.
It's because it was so good, it exploded your brain.
That's obviously what happened, Pat. I mean, duh. It fucking rips. I had a really good time. It's really, really good.
Should we read the summary?
Yeah, let's do the summary. It's very short because not a lot happens, but it's still a great episode.
Yeah. All right, so... episode 6, Condemned. In a bottle episode, Matt takes out the police and hides in an abandoned building with Vladimir. As the city spirals into chaos amid the bombing, Fisk and Murdoch speak via walkie-talkie, and Fisk explains that Matt's ideology is what makes him dangerous, but ultimately doomed to fail. Fisk has the police on scene executed by snipers, framing the man in black for their murders in the warehouse explosion that took the Russians. In the end, Vlad stays behind and Matt escapes via service tunnels to fight another day.
So, like, plot-wise, pretty thin on the ground as far as what happens. You could skip this episode, nothing changes plot-wise, except Matt and Fisk have their first, like, conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think what I love about this episode, this is what I love about all bottle episodes and, like, bottle stories in general.
Well, tell your disappointment to suck it. I'm doing a bottle episode.
There is so much tone setting and characterization and like maneuvering they're doing with these characters, particularly like Vlad and Matt and their kind of, I mean, Vlad is such a cool character in this episode. He just, every time he does something or says something, it's like, man, this guy is like really interesting to watch and see him do stuff. I guess if you haven't seen the episode, right? So Matt ostensibly saves Vlad from the police, calls Karen and calls Claire, and she kind of talks him through cauterizing his bullet wound with like a road flare, which is the gnarliest thing ever. And then, Vlad is like, you haven't thought about this properly. You need to go find the money guy. That's how you get Fisk. and then before revealing Leland's name, decides it'd be a good idea to throw him and Matt down like 5 stories of this building, and you get an incredible shot where Matt's like lying there and he's like struggling to get up, and they have this brief conversation, and Vlad says something along the lines of like, Matt's like, that wasn't a very smart thing to do, and Vlad goes, yeah, but I made you bleed. And then it's like, and then they have that little exchange where Matt's like, this isn't a game, and Vlad says, yeah, but if it was, you'd be losing. He just is a really strong, and I don't mean strong as in like physically, but I mean like characterization wise, a really strongly characterized in this episode for him to die. And I think that's a really, I don't know, I just think in a different show, maybe you have a take on this, maybe not. I think definitely in a different show, he just stays as like the typical Russian. I don't think you get this kind of nuance in these little moments here. I think you just get like a big head empty like guy who hates Matt.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think there is a lot. There's the typical beats that you would expect from an episode like this, but the stuff in between, there is a lot crammed in there. And yeah, I like how he sort of is a bit of like a meathead. Like you can tell that like the relationship between him and his brother was that his brother was the one that was sort of like
was the smart
bringing
guy.
him back down to earth. Yeah, like and managing Vladimir, and this dude, like, he just doesn't know. He's just so self-destructive. Like he just doesn't know what he should be doing. Hence why he tries to fight Matt in the state that he's in.
So
and just
funny.
Yeah. I think I've seen this episode a lot for some reason, but yeah, no, I really just in general, I love how this episode develops. I love how it escalates. I love the bottleness of it.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before, but like I think one of my favorite things in media, and this is no surprise to anyone that's read my books, is like those are secretly just bottle episodes that are tricking you into thinking they're not. I've been working on a new podcast that's sort of it's a podcast, but it'll be like a live stream as well, where I'm going to go through and I'm going to write a book end to end on stream. And one of the things that I was taking notes yesterday for it, and one of the things that I was talking to James about was the fact that the reason so there's this idea of like, we often talk about bottle episodes as like a concept in a TV show, but structurally it's the idea of where that comes from is the idea of a story in a bottle, which is this idea that you create a confined space where characters can't leave, and then they have to resolve some conflict to leave that space. And your classic example, right, is Alien. That's like the most classic bottle story, where they're on the ship and the alien is on the ship with them, and they have to negotiate the interpersonal politics and the relationships and try and escape this mortal jeopardy, and get away from this space, right? And it works really, really well because, and this is one of the biggest issues with horror stories in general. The reason that Alien works well is they can't leave. One of the biggest issues with horror as a genre is like, every single time something bad happens, you're like, why don't the people just fucking leave? Like, why don't they just leave? And that could be really tricky to negotiate, I think, in structure in general. Obviously, this isn't horror, but it's real. Like, they've really clearly thought out the stakes and the logistics of why they have to be stuck in this space and what that means.
Yeah.
And they use it in the reverse.
Actually,
like, yeah.
Yeah, what you're saying about like how they really have to figure out the context of how and why this takes place in the plot is something that is also sorry, I'm skipping like way ahead, but in season 2, when Punisher's got like Daredevil tied up, it's the most, because it's from, if you're thinking about like it from the perspective of like writers and storytellers, yeah, that's obviously something you want to have, where these two characters who have an interesting dynamic, an interesting opposition of ideology, you want them to sit down. You want that, what your favorite hero at the mercy of the villain trope, right? And so they can have this conversation.
Yep.
And that can so easily be contrived. You know, it's like how they end up in that situation is not as important as the situation.
Yes.
Whereas in Daredevil, you have it both ways. Like the way the process of getting there is just as solid and, you know, interesting, and it makes sense as anything that comes afterwards. Yeah, it's just something the show does really well. Nothing ever seems contrived, in my opinion.
I mean, and this is, to your point, this is the hero at the mercy of the villain scene, right? This is like, Matt is captured. He cannot leave. And Fisk comes on the radio, and he's like, let me tell you about my fucking ideology. Let me explain to you why you're wrong. And this is my worldview. And then Matt gets to go, hey, fuck you. Fuck you, dude.
I love how Matt just doesn't really have anything to say to Fisk. Like, nothing really worthwhile. He's just... like Fisk has so much power over Matt in this situation. Like, you know, not in terms of just like debate. Like Fisk is just annihilating Matt with his words and his ideology, and it's great.
But like, Matt doesn't care because he already has his mind made up about all of this.
Yeah. Wait, what was I gonna say? No, nothing. Never mind.
I mean, sort of following on that thought, because I think that's a really interesting thread to kind of tug on here, is like, I mean, you're getting this thing happening where Fisk is... So this is on paper a very elaborate sequence of events that Fisk is trying to pull off in order to frame the Man in Black, right? Where but like they're individually, they're quite simple. So like he blows up the Russians, and then has the like absolute genius evil fucking idea to have the police get like just like executed by a sniper, and then blame it on the Man in Black because he knows that there's footage of the Man in Black attacking police. It's this like, it's an idea so vile that no one else would think of it. Like, it is such a Fisk thing to think, to be like, how do I make this happen? It's just so craven and disgusting.
He's like killing 10 birds with one stone with this ploy as well, because he's also, they need to eliminate, I think Hoffman is the detective who loses his phone. They need to eliminate him, and then he's one of the police that they shoot.
Yeah, it's genius.
So he's just like doing so many things at once. Like,
and also it scares off, they're trying to scare off Uruk because they know that he's getting close.
Right.
And so that scares him away because they know that he has stakes in the game. It proves to the Man in Black, like it proves to Matt, like, hey, we'll do anything. There is nothing off limits here. And you also get that incredibly confronting little shot, which I think is just absolutely phenomenal, where it's when the SWAT guys are coming in, and they walk up to the cop who's been tied up. And he hunkers in front of him, and he says on the radio, like, Officer blah, blah, blah is dead, repeat, he's dead. And you see this guy realize what's about to happen, and then we watch this guy get stabbed in the fucking throat with a knife. Like, it is just...
And you can hear him muffling, like, what the fuck?
Oh, it's crazy. And they get to, Fisk solves so many problems at once in this episode. Even though ostensibly nothing changes plot-wise. Like, by that I mean, like, no big pieces move, but it solves all of these outstanding issues for Fisk. It's very clever. This is one of the hardest things to pull off in writing, is like, this, like you said, it doesn't feel contrived. It just feels natural, and drives home all of the things that we already kind of assumed to be true, I guess.
Yeah. And, it builds up more of that, that process, that how do things work in this world. You have the back and forth regarding like the developments of the search of the manhunt regarding Matt Murdock, and Wesley and Fisk in the limo talking about how to proceed and what's their plan and how you're going to maneuver all the moving parts. And not only does that sort of contribute into letting you know how Fisk is so powerful, it also is just integral to like the actual plot within the episode. It's just relevant. It's just showing you what's happening, and how it's happening.
Yeah, and you get that, I think, specifically with Turk's involvement, where I had forgotten his play here. I had forgotten that Fisk and Wesley... I remember that they set up Vladimir. I had forgotten that Turk is the one that tricks them into going after the Man in Black, and then also tricks them into going to the location. All of which we get the reveal afterwards was Wesley's idea. It's really it's this seamless of course it's Turk. Like, he just gets in the middle of all this stuff and works for the highest bidder. And so again, you get that really clear characterization of this recurrent character of like, what is his place in all of this? And the reason he doesn't get killed like everybody else, the reason he isn't targeted like everybody else, is because he really is just a guy who's like, hey, if you pay me the right amount, I'll do whatever you want. I don't have any allegiances. Like, I'm just a guy out here. That's a really cool contrast to these other kind of Machiavellian schemes that you see sort of Wesley and Fisk weaving. He's like the everyman, bad guy, right?
That is true. Maybe as a comparison, he's like Sir Bronn from Game of Thrones.
Oh, for sure.
Just like a sellsword.
Yeah, he literally
is.
Yeah.
Have no allegiances. Just do what you got to do to survive and make bank.
Just a gun for hire, man. That's how he'd be doing. Yeah. Selling dodgy pistols and shit.
Yeah. God, I still love that. This thing won't jam up. My name ain't Turk Barrett.
Such a good sequence. Just like the world's crummiest criminal as well. Like, he's just not good at doing crimes, which is very fun. Yeah. I do wonder if so I don't know. The kind of pivoting back to what we're talking about with like the bottle episode stuff. I think pacing wise, this kind of this for me. So how many episodes have we got left this season? So this is
7.
So there's 7. So if there's 12, okay. So this is just before the midpoint. This episode. So next episode is kind of like I think it's a really interesting choice of where to put this, because next episode is where we get the back half of we kind of get like our two little kind of episodes of Matt's backstory, which set us up for a few different bits and pieces, and then it's just like all craziness the rest of the season. Like, then all the dominoes start to fall over each other, where you get Matt. You get the Devil of Hell's Kitchen becoming famous. You get Foggy finding out that it's Matt, and then you get Kingpin's plan kind of coming into play, and then the ending. So this is like in some ways absent the stick episodes. This is like our kind of quote unquote calm before the storm type moment, where like this is where like we have a new status quo that is going to need to be overcome. Right? We know now that the Devil of Hell's Kitchen is like going to become notorious. We know that Fisk is kind of in control, and we know that like all of these puzzle pieces have been cleared off the board, right? These corrupt police are gone. The Russians are gone. We're now kind of setting the stage for like, what's the big play? What's the big play at the end? Like, what's the plan here? And I think you get that real sense that I don't know that all of this works if it isn't centered around the man in the locked room problem of like Matt can't leave. I think if this was set differently, or like he's in a different part of the city, I think it becomes too much. Like, I think the fact that he's in one place, it's one set for him, like literally he's in one building. I think that's kind of why this works well. And I wonder if a different version of this falls apart under the weight of the different moving parts. Like, it seems like a really smart choice.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. You just really in Matt's perspective because of the setting and the restriction of this setting, which I guess maybe prepares you for the next 2 episodes, which are about his backstory.
Yeah.
But I mean, something we haven't talked about yet is like all the real probing and dissecting into his moral philosophy in this episode. one of the most interesting things is Vladimir sort of, sort of chiding him about like, you stand there and let me die, but you couldn't kill me yourself. Yeah. Is that where you draw the line? You can only get that from this sort of intimate setting, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, and then you get Vlad directly confronting him, and then he's like, well, we both know that you did this for your own sake, right? And Matt says, if I didn't need you alive, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
And then Vlad's like, yeah, but you chuck dudes into like dumpsters, bro. Like, that guy's in a coma. And Matt's like, yeah, but he's breathing, isn't he? There's this way in which like Vlad's kind of really calling Matt out on this shit, and Matt's like, I don't give a fuck, man. Like, because Matt's whole thing is like, it's a divine. He's only worried about divine judgment. He doesn't care about these little mortals who like have their little opinions about it. He's worried about like judgment in the face of God, and like Bible don't got nothing about putting people in comas. Like,
yeah. Did I see it in the rule book? No, hell
it's
no.
Not in there, so it's chill. Yeah. It's chill with the big man upstairs. But you make a point, right? Which is that he saves Vlad for the wrong reasons, but still saves him. Ethically, is that right or wrong? Like, and I think this episode is like really interested in Vlad kind of calling attention to that.
Yeah, I like how sort of like ambiguous as to why he was so desperate to revive Vladimir. Is it because if he died, Matt knows that it would. There's nowhere else to reroute that cause of events. I mean, it'd be a bit of a stretch to say, oh, that cop who shot him earlier, that's who killed him. If it would be pretty obvious that it was Matt who was responsible for his death. Mm-hmm. Is that why, or is it because as he keeps saying, he needs him alive to get answers? Is it because it's the right thing to do? Who knows?
But I really enjoy ambiguity. I think is really difficult to get right. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I have a lot of gripes with how a lot of stories choose to wield silence, and I think often it comes down to like, if it's done, if it feels naturally like something that wouldn't be in the text and it doesn't get spoken about, or it goes unremarked upon directly, I think it works. I think when it feels unnatural either way, so if it feels unnatural for someone not to bring it up, or if it feels unnatural for someone to bring it up, that's when it can kind of get really tricky. This episode does both. Vlad says a bunch of shit out loud that we've been thinking the whole fucking time, but also why Matt did that, like why he's like I'm not fucking done with you yet. Why he revives him is still really ambiguous, because I don't think Matt fully knows is the other thing. He's just sort of like he's really in this position of like he's just kind of like doing shit because he's trapped. Yeah. Like, his back's against the wall and he's just trying everything he can. It's the only thing he can try and do.
That is true. I mean, if you've come this far, you've dragged this guy through the streets of Hell's Kitchen to this abandoned building. You're surrounded by cops. Be ashamed to let him die now. So
exactly,
might as well revive him.
May as well. Oh, if I have to bloody bring him back to life, I guess I will. Oh my god, bloody Mondays, am I right, guys?
It's I don't know. It's just an interesting choice in the script as well to have Vladimir die and to have Matt bring him back. Like, it seems kind of random, but I don't know. Is there some Jesus metaphor that I'm not seeing here?
I don't think so. It is a bit of a double beat with his kind of like faux sacrifice at the end, though. Matt realizes that Vlad is like not the worst dude ever. It is more than a means to an end twice in this episode. Like, it is kind of a double beat. But I mean, that's fine. It's one of those things that like I would have picked up on in the script and gone, no one else is gonna notice. Like, so you only notice as the person that wrote it, where you're like, I guess it's really easy to do on bottle episodes as well because you're not working with a lot of stuff. I also
should have called up Dan Harmon.
Yeah, exactly right. I did also I noticed as well, and this is maybe just like because I haven't watched this episode in a while, but there's a moment at the toward the end where the SWAT guys are coming around the corner and Matt just like grabs him and flings him out of the way of the gunfire.
He flings Vladimir.
Yeah. And it's honestly very funny. Like, he does that, and I'm like, oh, that's gotta hurt. Like, and then, you know, when he's defeated the guys, Vlad's there with the gun, you know, lying where he's fallen because Matt's thrown him. And so there's this way in which Matt trying to save him from being shot alive on instinct is ultimately what gets him killed, because that's like, that landing is what means he can't get up. Which is like kind of really interesting to be like, so is it Matt's fault he dies? Like, or, you know, is it the situation? Like, it comes down to that, like, what's your ethical framework on these kinds of things?
This dilemma of like, how many deaths is Matt actually responsible for? It gets like, it's already like getting tiring. Like, there's like, I don't know, I can't remember if it's this episode or the previous episode, but he's pretty much responsible for that blind dude getting shot in the head, because he hides behind him. when the Russians are shooting at him, he hides directly behind him, and then he gets shot in the head. But you know, it wasn't the other guy shot him. Like, I just hid behind him. I just used him as a meat shield. Yeah,
that was the last episode, the previous one. Yeah, fully gets shot through. Yeah, it's pretty brutal. Yeah, damn. Matt's really just out here getting people killed, huh? Well, because then it's like the police die. Is that Matt's fault? Like, I don't know, man. The ethical accountability here becomes challenging.
Yeah.
Not my area of expertise, frankly. Look, I mean, I think that kind of wraps up the Russians arc really for us in this show, right? They're kind of, they're gone, and now we've got kind of Fisk assuming more responsibility within his kind of like criminal little underworld thing, but sharing, I guess, like the rewards of that, which is pretty interesting. But I think represents his first real consolidation this season of his power. And yeah, as you said, wipes off a bunch of pieces from the board, right? Like, we get rid of the corrupt police, we get rid of the Russians, we scare off, you know, Ben, and the one thing I thought was, what did you make of this? Which is, and I wasn't quite sure what this maneuver was, and I think it's in order to frame the Man in Black, but Fisk like tells Wesley to call all of the media to the scene of like the shootout. Is that to capture the police getting shot? Is that the idea there? Like, I couldn't quite pass that out.
No, he doesn't call the media to go to the scene. He calls them to release the footage, the security footage of him beating up the cops.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. In order to incriminate him for the explosion and then he's going to kill the police.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I didn't really put that together. Interesting. That's some evil shit right there.
Yeah, some mustache twirling shit right there.
Yeah, bad dude. Well, look. Do you have anything else you want to talk about this episode, or should we kind of talk about what's next and wrap up?
Yeah, no, good for this episode.
Cool. Well, look, those are the episodes we were going to cover today. Next time we will be talking about episode 7 and episode 8. So episode 7, Stick, and then episode 8, Shadows in the Glass. These two episodes, we've grouped them together because they're really just about Matt's past in some sense. So it's episodes 5 and 6 of season 1. So probably a bit of a shorter episode, but there's also a lot to unpack in that with Matt's childhood and like learning how to be a big karate guy. There's a lot of stuff in there to kind of pick through. And just some of the worst wigs that keep coming back. For 3 seasons. Those bad wigs keep coming back.
Really?
Yeah, they put a bad wig on the kid repeatedly. He doesn't have that hair in real life.
Okay, I'm really, really terrible with noticing like wigs. Like, remember that when House of the Dragon came out, everyone was like, "Oh, look how terrible these wigs are." I did not notice at all. I thought they were fine.
You're like, who's in a wig? No,
I don't. Yeah, I don't pick up on that sort of stuff.
Not a wig conscious guy.
I'm not. I missed that class.
Yeah.
In high school.
As he was sick that day.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. I think those 2 episodes are going to be really. We're going to have a lot of things to talk about. I think with the character work they're doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, that'll do it for this episode. Pat, where can people sort of find what you do on the internet? You got anything you want to plug? What's the go?
Me?
Yeah, you, Pat.
Well, people can find me on YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher. YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and iTunes. Mm-hmm. My podcast is named A Method to the Madness. If you're maybe look up A Method to the Madness podcast, just to make sure you find it. It's a podcast I do with my friend Mitchie. We talk about movies and TV shows and a lot of Breaking Bad. If you're into that,
if you're into that, which if you're into this, you probably are.
Yeah,
the format's the same, but it's one episode per episode of the podcast. But it's a similar idea.
Yes, for our Breaking Bad series. Yeah, exactly. We're probably going to talk. Mitchie's on holiday at the moment. When he gets back, we're going to do a bunch of Better Call Saul stuff because he finished watching that. Ooh. So, yeah, stay tuned for that.
Hell yeah, I'm keen for that. And yeah, go check it out. Links will obviously be in the show notes. Or you could just look up A Method to the Madness on your podcast catcher of choice. If you want to help support the show, best way to do it is to tell a friend you think might enjoy it, or give us a rating or review on your podcast catcher of choice. You can find everything else we do at ZeroIndent.com. We appreciate the heck out of your support, and we're very, very excited to come back next time and talk about the episode 7 and episode 8. So if you are watching along, be sure to consume those, and if not, we'll catch you guys next week. Thanks so much for watching and listening. It's bloody. Hey, watch out for them Russians or whatnot. Whatever the lesson here is.
Your dad gets kidnapped. Don't worry, some guy's coming for you.
You'll be right. She'll be right, mate. Don't worry about it. Matt's on his way. Yeah, good stuff. Well, I'll catch you guys next time.